Last night I just finished reading Aesop's Fables translated by Samuel Croxall, and I was struck by the perpetual modernity of this book. I mean, it must be the working definition of all classics that they're perpetually modern, aka they're timeless. But this being about morals, about parables, you would think it would be somewhat time-locked to when it was written, but no. And one of the fables that struck me most about how it could be transferred from the ancient into the modern was one in which seemed to eerily relate to our plight with social media, and maybe especially Twitter and all of those weirdly brain-rotting applications. And this fable was 114, called The Kid and the Wolf. A kid being mounted upon the roof of a shed and seeing a wolf below, loaded him with all manner of reproaches. Upon which the wolf, looking up, replied, "Do not value yourself, vain creature, upon thinking you mortify me. For I look upon this ill language as not coming from you, but from the place which protects you." I mean, I at first saw social media, these vitriolic and venomous words that were thrown at each other, especially in the political realm. They metaphorically didn't so much come from the person themselves, but from the technology which allowed them to hurl such vitriolic and venomous insults at one another. Does that make sense? With both feral and foxy sass, Aesop's wit made it come to pass that a boy could exclaim before manhood came, "Oh, how much I can learn from an ass!" Hey man, it's a limerick, it's supposed to be bawdy and ribald, man, come on. But no, seriously though, it is kind of astonishing how much wisdom is front-loaded into Aesop's Fables. I mean, it's just right there, and we as a society have been walking by it on the street every day of our lives, and all we needed to do was read Aesop's Fables. I mean, that's the key to everything. If only we read to our children Aesop's Fables, the world would be a better place. If only. If only. You know, it's like as Einstein said, if you want your children to grow up smart, read to them fairy tales. I say, read to them as well Aesop's Fables, and then they'll grow up to be, well, maybe quasi-saints. You never know, you might get lucky, win the baby lottery. But to be serious, it seems to me immorality is our default starting trait, and morality is learned. And I think this insight is unconsciously rippling through the minds of many young people today who, in a society so devoid of moral insight, exploration, and explanation, or even care for morality at all, young people are turning towards, say, self-help in an unconscious effort to make themselves a better person. But in reality, the best self-help book you can get is Aesop's Fables. I mean, come on now. That's what literature's for. And plus, Aesop's Fables is endlessly rereadable. I mean, it's just got so much pith and depth to it and so much charm. Like, oh my god, so much charm. And especially with a translator like Samuel Croxall, who just kind of anglicizes so much of the prose that the semi-anglicization, whoa, that's a big word, the semi-anglicization of the work brings it weirdly closer to our hearts than all of these newer translations, of which some I've read a little, but it seems to me Croxall has the crux of it. And best of all, he has a good sense of humor, which every translator in the world needs, and which so many translators evidently lack. The amount of missed irony out of the world of translation, it must be unfathomable. Now, Aesop's interspecies brutality notwithstanding, this is a warm, cozy, safe haven of a book in which you can fortify your heart and edify your mind and, I don't know, become a better person? Become a better person? Is that saying too much? Is that being cliche? Well, the least that can be said for it is that it's very enjoyable and it's a little bit enlightening. Now, how difficult is this book? 0 out of 5. Not difficult at all. It takes maybe 1 day to read, and you put on top of this that it was written for children, and on top of this, if you still can't penetrate the heart of the fables, Croxall, the translator, has put after every fable, he has put a part called the application, in which he explains how it might be applied in your own life. Now this might sound trivial, but how good is the title? To me, 3 out of 5. And at first I said, AESOP, you're not trying hard enough. What is AESOP's Fables? We live in a saturated free market economy. What are you doing? But when I read more into it, it seemed to me that this way of simple titling made a kind of mental space for the wisdom every fable encapsulated. I mean, what can be said for the plot? The plot follows the parable, and the parable follows the moral lesson, and the moral lesson follows the wisdom of AESOP. So when you talk about plot, you can really only talk about the wisdom of AESOP, it seems to me, which we will get to later in the excerpts. But characters, I mean, we've got an assortment of animals, gods, and even men, which I didn't expect at first, and even inanimate objects, especially the last fable, which is an argument between a pair of glasses and a snuff box. The central characters that we revolve around are, say, the lion, the wolf, the fox which is also called renard, which is apparently a literary term for a fox. It came out of a French character who was so popular that the French stopped calling foxes whatever they called them before and started calling them renard. Then of course we have donkeys, bulls, birds, and snakes, but interestingly enough, no spiders. I mean, my favorite animal, insect, arachnid. Do you think they'll play some kind of important role in such an anthropomorphized world as Aesop's Fables? But they're nowhere in sight, and this makes me come to the conclusion that Aesop must have had arachnophobia. I mean, he must have. Spiders are too beautiful not to include in a piece of literature like this. I mean, come on. Now when it comes to themes, what Aesop's Fables is obsessed about, I mean, Aesop being a slave, well, because of that, one of the recurring themes is liberty. That it is better to be poor and free than it is to be rich and enslaved. On top of that, there is this recurring theme of people electing themselves into tyranny. Another theme is that no matter how bad things are, it can always get worse. Hell is a bottomless pit. Another is a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. And reading these particular fables, I mean, it's hard not to bring in mind the transatlantic specter of America. And the last one, even though there be more, is that fake friends are more disgusting than enemies, and they deserve a worse punishment than enemies, even though enemies be terrible and violent. And that is because enemies didn't say that they were going to be your friend and didn't lie to you to your face, so on and so forth. Now, what can a reader learn from Aesop's Fables? And it seems to me the first is that immoral action is always repaid. Now, some people would say this is a quasi-mystical statement, but I would say that it is a practical metaphor in the same way that gods are a practical metaphor. Now, why is that? Well, it seems to me, just as Freud said, repeating after the ancient Greeks, character is fate. How you act is what happens to you. And just as someone acts consistently immorally, they also draw to themselves a set of eyes, a set of behaviors they invite into their world, a set of circumstances that reflects that immorality. The second thing a reader can learn, and this was also repeated by Freud thousands of years later, be careful what you wish for, because you might get it. And the last is always beware of sweet words. Be hyper-vigilant whenever someone speaks sweetly to you, and especially if they're a stranger. Now, what can a writer learn from Aesop's Fables? Now, here's interesting, because the fables are a kind of workaround to a philosopher's dogmatic writing. You know, instead of a philosopher hammering home the point, Aesop has used sweet words to let a reader find meat in the natural truth that Aesop lays out for them. And so a writer would benefit from, say, abstracting from the particular and pulling it a little more closer to the archetypal. So an example of that would be, instead of using imperative words like do this, go there, you make some animals do this and go there. Now, what can be seen through the translation? Not much can be seen, of course, but what can be seen is that Aesop was a great pithy carver of images that stung wisdom, that left you with the resonance of the meaning of a fable without bogging you down with details. I mean, some of these fables are like 4 lines, 1 sentence even. And the text I read had the voice of a wise, sagacious old man filtered through the humorous, semi-anglicized English voice with a very English rhythm of speech. And I mean, that might sound anathema to some people, but it's great fun. And I don't think you will be able to find a translation more vigorous and vivacious and lively than Samuel Croxall's, because everyone tries to dull themselves down to try and fit the ancient words. Now, the last interesting thing is this combination, this confluence of two people's wit. That is the wit of Aesop, which shows through the content of the parables, and the wit of Croxall, which shows through the prose and the form of the parables. And this merging together of two wits creates a kind of Frankensteinian Aesop, which we can only get in English. In the end, the whole book has the feeling of a great raconteur like Orson Welles telling you joke after joke at an endless dinner. I mean, doesn't that just sound delicious? And quite because of that, my jealousy for this book is 3 out of 5. It has so many perfectly compacted fables that carry inside of it such profundity with such weightlessness from the outside. But when you peel away the tissue, you find delicious meat. Now, for the moment of beauty I chose, what you need to know is that Aesop was a slave for a very long time. Aesop's master was a prince called Xanthus, and in this fable 202, called The Tongues, Xanthus has asked Aesop to prepare a great feast for his friends. And for this feast, he was to supply the finest meats. And so the appetizer was served and they had tongues and everybody loved it. But then dinner was served and they had tongues again. And then dessert was served and they had tongues again. And Xanthus, of course, got very angry and said to Aesop, "Did not I command you to prepare the choicest dainties?" "And what excels the tongue?" replied Aesop. "It is the great channel of learning and philosophy. By this noble organ, addresses, commerce, contracts, eulogies, and marriages are completely established. On this moves life itself, and of course nothing is equal to the tongue." Now the next night, Xanthus asked Aesop again to prepare another feast, but this time with the worst meats. And lo and behold, at this feast, again, Aesop provided tongues. Xanthus, more incensed still, asked him if this was the entertainment he had ordered, and Aesop declared that he had exactly fulfilled his commands. "For what," he remarked, "is worse than the tongue? Is it not frequently the ruin of empires, cities, and private connections? Is it not the conveyance of calumnies and lies? In short, is it not the grand disturber of civil society?" Both master and company were filled with astonishment. That last line kind of reminds me of when people say, "and everyone clapped." Now, this brilliant twisting of the tongue as the best and worst thing completely hit me by surprise the first time I read it. And this is like one of the requirements of art, that it surprises us with new strangeness, with originality, you might say. But I put it in beauty because the setup and the payoff are just so smooth that this concept could be, said by a philosopher just in the open air in an open paragraph. But no, Aesop has put it into a little morsel of a story in which Xanthus has asked Aesop to prepare a feast, and on that feast, Aesop serves tongues. Instead of Xanthus just asking Aesop, "Aesop, what's the best part of a human?" "Oh, tongue." You know what I mean? Now, what I chose for originality was this part in Fable 135 called The Envious Man and the Covetous. And this one I had heard in part from a joke Slavoj Žižek used to tell over and over again. And he used to say it was a Slovenian joke, but it seems here that it goes much further back into ancient Greece. Or maybe that Slovenian joke and this ancient Greek fable has a cognate origin. Who knows? Anyway, in it, an envious man and a covetous man happen to be praying to Jupiter in the same place. And Jupiter not caring for them, he sends down Apollo to go and figure it out. Apollo therefore opened his commission and withal told them that to make short of the matter, whatever the one asked, the other should have it double. Upon this, the covetous man, though he had 1,000 things to request, yet forbore to ask first, hoping to receive a double quantity, for he concluded that all men's wishes sympathized with his. By this means, the envious man had an opportunity of preferring his petition first, which was the thing he aimed at. So, without much hesitation, he prayed to be relieved by having one of his eyes put out, knowing that of consequence his companion would be deprived of both. What is more perfect than having the envious, resentful man? Instead of being in the position in which he gains a little bit and someone else gains much more, he would rather lose something for someone else to lose more and be happier for it. The cognitive strength that it must have taken to first come up with this set of circumstances. I mean, the first time you hear it, the punchline is just so unexpected and so beautifully perfect that only someone as sharp, shrewd, and wise as Aesop perhaps could have only produced it. Now, for the moment of wisdom, this one I really fell into my heart, is Fable 100 and, oh my god, these Roman numerals, 197, called The Stone and the Man. Aesop, having been sent to see what company were at the bath, observed that many stumbled, both going in and coming out, at a stone which lay at the entrance, and that only one attempted to lay it aside. He accordingly returned and told his master there was but one person in the bath. Xanthus, arriving and seeing a multitude, asked him the reason of his false information. Aesop told him there was a great stone at the entrance, over which many stumbled, but one only removed the obstacle, so that there was only one man, the rest being little better than ciphers, zeros, nothings, nobodies. And this falls in line with David Lynch's belief that most people don't have selves. That can also be translated into most people are not conscious, or the joke where most people are NPCs, so on and so forth. I mean, it goes on. Sheeple. Now, of course, whenever anyone utters this kind of joke, it always has to swing back around and hit them on the other side of the cheek in a way, because in some senses of our life, we are all sheeple because we have to outsource information to some authority, and we have to make that fallacious unloading of weight in our life, so we're not just 100% of the time weighed down by the complexities of modernity, right? Now, this dichotomy between conscious people and unconscious people, or maybe better, non-conscious people, by Samuel Croxall is put into the dichotomy of people who use their reason and people who are fools. And bringing up Croxall, he said this really insightful thing in the introduction that, I mean, it might tickle your fancy as much as it did mine. And here Croxall is talking about the beauty and usefulness of Aesop's fables. They who are governed by reason need no other motive than the mere goodness of a thing to incite them to the practice of it. But men, for the most part, are so superficial in their inquiries that they take all upon trust and have no taste for anything but what is supported by the vogue of others, and which it is inconsistent with the fashion of the world not to admire. I mean, how true is that today as it was then, and how true it is for literature today. Everything moves with this vogue that has a slight political tinge to it. Now, when talking about parts worth memorizing, I don't think precisely the words should be memorized, but the images that we are left with from Aesop's fables are the things that sear themselves into our mind. Because the words themselves, at least in this translation, are very nice, but aren't of that aesthetic quality that is inevitable and that is worth memorizing in the words they were told in, if that makes sense. And for that reason, the score I give this book is 3 out of 5. I leave 2 points empty because, I mean, obviously the original ancient Greek must have been 2 points better than the translation. Now, was this less than, better than, or equal to Sappho's fragments? My God, wow, that's a hard question. But it seems to me that the images in Aesop's fables steer themselves so much more into the mind, and that it is so much more useful, even though art is useless, it is so much more useful than Sappho's fragments, even though Sappho's translation has way more control of the language than the translation of Aesop's fables. So Aesop's fables would have to be better then. Anyway, that's another book down. I'm trying to do this as fast as possible because I just realized we're not going to finish in a year if I keep going this slowly. But anyway, the next book is Heraclitus's Fragments, translated by Brooks Haxton. And I know some people might not like Brooks Haxton as a translator, but it's just what I went with. Anyway, if you made it to the end, thanks for watching this far. If you like this video, a like would really help me out. Subscribe if you want to read along, and comment down below if I missed anything obvious about this book. Anyway, see you later.